meeting of the Select Board and the Advisory Board. We'll each call our prospective boards to order, but I'd like to call this informational meeting for November 21st to order at 1800 hours.
I don't need this. Call the Templeton Advisory Board to order.
Great. This evening we've got, as we had promised the public, we wanted to hold a series of informational meetings. I say series, but at least a number of opportunities for the public to come in as we deal with our budget situation that we've had since the start of July 1st. We now have a budget. The school committee had recently voted on the 19.5 number. We now have our assessment, and now we have an actual clear path to the end of fiscal year 20. But 19.5, as we kept pointing out in the variety of joint meetings that we've had, did not come without some casualties on the town side. Public safety has already borne the brunt. Public works have, public safety could not hire. They reduced staff, they reduced coverage hours. I kept being reminded of that, and I would continually remind, I know there was a car versus pole this morning, and the first thing I thought of after, I wonder if they're okay, was coverage, all of the different situations that we have out there. I think we're in the right path forward, but again, these are informational meetings, a joint meeting with the advisory committee, and I'm really glad that we were able to do this as a joint meeting to basically say, well, in the scenario where we did get that 19.5 and we did have a reduced assessment from the 6.9 million originally, we've now come down to $71,000 worth of cuts. And Adam, the assistant town administrator, is here this evening to kind of go over what that scenario is. And to generate any discussion based on that. But that's really why we're here tonight. And for those that may be watching after the fact, this is part of that open forum to make sure that we are transparent and we actually have that discussion about how we go forward as a community. Tony?
So I'd just like to ask, now that we're at where we're at with the budget, has the police and fire been given permission to fill vacancies and press forward with what they wanted for an original budget?
So right now, I know that Carter is having discussions with public safety to basically say, as we move forward, as we make these cuts, I think we're in jello right now, but they are starting to have, I've already seen some of the emails being generated about when and who. And what if we're dealing with like 1.5 full-time equivalents? What can we convert that to? Can we put it to two FTEs? Can we start our hiring process?
I would hope so. I mean, I think they've borne the brunt dead.
Yep.
And then if we are not, for want of better words, reserving that money,
yeah,
in case we couldn't come to a budget, then the money should be there. And to me, they should be given permission right away to go do that.
Right.
So, and then other than that, we appreciate you inviting us to help solve this and make good things happen.
In the way that as Adam gives his brief, if it's an open forum, we've got a lot of staff here tonight. I'm really happy to see a lot of the staff coming in. If we have questions, let's try and we can reduce the decorum a little bit, and we can ask directions. I don't need anyone through my board to ask permission. Let's have this more. It's an informational meeting, so
yeah.
I want people to feel really be able to ask the questions. Great. Adam, the floor is yours. Anything from the board before we begin?
Anybody?
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Select Board, Mr. Chairman, members of the Advisory Committee, as you can see, all of the department heads are here tonight. Mm-hmm. It's been a long road, as the Chairman pointed out, for fiscal year 20. And I do as well want to commend the public safety chiefs, the fire chief, the police chief, as well as our highway director for being proactive early on in this budget process, because we weren't sure, as you pointed out, Mr. Chairman, where the number was gonna land, with the 19.78 million or the 19.5. I can't tell you how many, the last couple weekends were, myself and the town administrator were working on reviewing the latest budget versus actual comparison to the budget and
Yeah.
going through that. So I just wanted to touch upon that before I proceed.
I agree with you.
Thank you. So the status, the Narragansett Regional School District approved the 19.5 million, which avoids the state setting their budget. But we still must cut $71,322. As was pointed out, why the cuts? We already decided certainly not by unjustifiably changing revenue estimates or use of one-time revenues. So cuts were our only option. That was already agreed upon by the board. We've already went over all this, but I just wanted to touch upon that before I get into our action plan on how we can address this with having the least effect on the employees, the staff, and the team. This is our action plan. So reviewing the budget at length, we were able to make a cut of $42,500 to the insurance and benefits. Why? If you look in your budget book, we budgeted for a 6% increase, because you never really know where the health insurance is gonna land, how much it's gonna go up, so we budgeted for 6%. And it landed at 0.5%. So right away, we were able to make some savings there. And also because the police, fire, and highway department have not filled benefited positions, we were able to safely make a cut of $42,500 out of that without making any significant cuts right from, so this is the fastest and safest cut for the town. That was the first thing we looked at. Priority number one was that cut. So then we moved to the snow and ice. And as you know, Bob and his team are moving to salt, which is gonna be huge for the town.
I saw it out there hard on the ground already.
And as you know, with the fiscal year, you can't reduce it lower than the fiscal year 19 number, because
Right.
that way you can't deficit spend. So what we were able to do was cut that 5,000. That way we won't be below our fiscal year 19 number. We reviewed the numbers, and the 5,000 is another safe cut.
Right. I think that brings it down to like 147 or somewhere in that neighborhood. Right, yeah.
And Bob was also involved with that as well, but, because we could always backfill that anyways later on.
Right. As an emergency.
Correct. Then we looked at, well, you know, everybody else has been proactive for the most part. Early on, we looked at a cut in our budget, the select board, of 5,000, reducing town council. I mean, it's already below recommended levels, but we can always backfill. And that was the third one that we felt comfortable with, reviewing our budget. Okay, moving on to the senior services. You're gonna see this number, 17,500. As you know, we had a full-timer there, and that position got open. And because we're restructuring that position, or restructuring that department, this open position will still be able to have us put a part-timer there. That way they'll have not the same amount of staff, but close
You
to
have
it.
one full-time and then part-time?
It would be one full-time and two part-time
Okay, or, okay.
Hey, Chief.
with that. And then the last one would be development services of $1,322. This is the smallest cut. We're reducing supplies. You can see the budget versus actual at the bottom. We saw that early on in the process, in our department head meeting, Carter and I chatted with all the department heads and basically said, try to slow down the spending as much as you can. Our development services director, Lori Wida, has been very good holding back spending, and she kept her supply level at significantly, so we feel comfortable that we could do the 1,322 there.
Okay.
And that brings us to our fiscal year 20 gap closing plan. The school budget at 19,500,000 with our assessment. Our town dollars leaving us with a beginning gap of 71,322, and all the cuts, you take the 71,322, you subtract the 42,500 from insurance and benefits, that leaves us with a gap of 28,822. You cut the snow and ice, 5,000, brings us down to 23,822. The select board, another 5,000, brings us down to 18,822, and the senior services, 17,500. Brings us down to 1,322, and development services, 1,322. It leaves us at zero with a balanced budget. That, honestly, we went through this book. We went through the budget versus actuals. We went through all the finances. We talked with all the department heads. We did everything we can to find the least harmful cuts to make this budget to be the best that it can be for all the departments. And I'm proud to have all the staff here with me tonight in presenting this to both the select board and the members of the advisory committee.
Question.
Mr. Chair. Yep.
Really for Lori, is that sustainable? That's not.
Through attrition of one of the employees, we have been able to save for the last few months, so it is attainable.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is that your last slide?
Thank you.
There you go, that sets you up for that one.
$700.
Thank you, Adam, I really appreciate that.
Really good.
Huh?
And that was a bluff if I've ever seen one. That was the bottom line up front. What I'd like to remind everybody is that go back to your last slide. To get to that took a lot of work, and you had to accept. So that, as I characterize it, if I say it's if that's the end product, another product needed to be built prior to that, and you had to believe in that. You had to basically understand where that was coming from. So it took a lot to try and do that. And before you got this product, you had to go back and say, what were the preemptive cuts and what is going to get us so we're not going to get whacked with 500,000 if we get to December 1st or something like that. So it's a whole series, it's a whole process that we've gone through to be able to say, with the support of the community at this point, to get to a minimum amount of cuts affecting the town to get to that zero number.
So if I might ask, the 71,322, was that derived from a higher number, less the cuts, or the, you used a word and I just slipped my mind, the preemptive,
Right.
where Bob wasn't able to hire a laborer, so let's just say he saved 10,000, is that, so that number included all the salary Chief Bennett, Chief Dickey didn't spend, and since they didn't spend it, it made that number 71,322. So really, the number would have been higher,
Right,
but we sort of had a
287
little in the
wasn't it?
bank, if you will.
Right, but to extend on to the other point of your earlier question, what can we do now? I believe that what's missing out of it is that we've taken those preemptive cuts as if we were on a burn rate towards the end of the
Right.
fiscal year, understanding at some point, what if the school committee voted at the first meeting and we were done? At that point, it's all gone. It's not like we've wiped it out from the department. So there's a third leg to that stool there to say there's still maneuver room to be able to get back the services within the budget that we have. But
Yeah,
that
that's
ultimately,
my
the town's
concern.
budget number remains unchanged, and that's how we get the 71.
Right. I mean, that's my biggest concern, is getting the chiefs and Bob,
Yeah.
the staff that they need to completely fulfill what they're doing. I mean, that's, personally, I don't want to speak for the rest of the board, but.
Tony, what I'd like to add is, so we have a cut line there. The cut line stopped after developmental services,
Yep.
supplies to give us nice yellow-colored folders for our town meeting. I'm only kidding. I was pretty impressed with that, though. Underneath that, if we had to go any deeper, is treasurer collector would have had to take a hit. Veterans, highway again, building and grounds, fire and EMS again, police again, senior services as it's characterized on the product that developed this, senior services round 2, advisory committee, and finally some final like insurance and benefits to really squeeze the last bit of lemon juice out of that lemon. So there was a lot, it could have been a lot worse. If the number wound up being 312, I just go in there for a moment, if it was 312, we would have a lot more to be able to consider. But these are still significant. I mean, you still have to be able to, I understand what you're saying with the insurance and benefits, because we slide the rule, so to speak,
Yep.
for what we have. But snow and ice, you know, we don't know what the winter's gonna be like. The Farmer's Almanac in my house literally just sits on the back of the toilet. You know, whether it's been read, I don't know what the winter's going to be.
It's a little more information than we need. It's coming.
Select board is, you know, that's a combination of legal services and the stipend that was voted in last time. We would gladly give that up to try and make ends meet within the town. And then senior services, that was a culmination of a series of unfortunate events that brought us to that point. But it's still significant, and maybe that's, you know, one that we wind up having the most comment on. But again, I look back down through it and I see they would have taken a second round
So
of hits as well.
senior services really aren't being cut, it's just staff, right? The way you're gonna,
Well,
The mitigation strategy, yes.
round 2 would have been the part-time position.
right, but what I mean is, they're gonna have their staff, they're gonna have all their services. It's just gonna be 1 full-time and 2 part-time people.
Can I just,
Sure.
they did preemptively reduce their operating hours.
Right,
Okay.
so are they gonna maybe bring those back up, or?
They're on the same par with the library at this point, so
Okay.
I guess that's a discussion.
We just wanna make sure our seniors are getting the services that they need also. That,
In like what I told you about, I've already seen the emails to try and say, where are we now gonna do our personnel backfills and hires and things like that.
Mhm.
That is one where that's being keenly looked at to say, how can we configure that, to make sure that we do get those services back to where, you know, a level that we had an expectation for.
so, does anybody have any comments on this? I'm gonna switch gears a little bit. That's all right.
And
So-
I mean, I don't think that we still have flexibility for certain things, like if snow and ice goes deep.
Talking about, too.
Last night, I know that Beverly Bartolomeo, you know, got on us for not using the reserve account. We're trying to preserve that from
So we didn't, when we had our pre-town meeting, we discussed that, and Will brought that very point up, rightfully so. And Carter basically said, for such a low amount, we can absorb it right now, so early into the fiscal year, that, probably isn't a bad idea to just, if we can solve it another way, without really doing any type of, damage to anything, it's best to keep that reserve account to as late in the year as possible and keep it as funded as possible. And with the fact that we already took a lesser fund than we had requested, so I don't know if you want to say any more about that, Will. I know he was very,
No, I have nothing to say on that.
he was very adamant about that.
But it has been higher than fiscal year 19, the reserve account.
It's irrelevant.
Just wanted to
Yes,
point
you're
that out.
right. No, I know that, so going forward, okay, I think these cuts are great. Well, I don't think any cuts are great, but I mean, I think the fact that you really found the $71,000 with the minimal amount of pain is great, but we're starting the budget cycle for next year. By my quick math during all the math thing, the town of Templeton pays approximately $400,000 more to keep Phillipston Memorial open. And that is why we sent you that email for an
Yep.
ad hoc committee, because I don't think one Templeton dollar should be spent to keep Phillipston open. Okay, and that's based on the operating costs of each school of about $1 million and $3 million, the 80-20 share. I was generous with the 80-20 share, and my math showed that Templeton pays $400,000 to keep Phillipston. It was about that Phillipston Memorial open, and $400,000 into our town when we know that the Worcester Retirement Fund is going to be going up quite a bit. We may be getting some small businesses in town, but we have got to solve this, the school department. We've got to kind of push them and say, look, the town of Templeton can't pay. Okay, we cannot keep cutting services to our citizens to keep a school for 120 kids open. If Phillipston wants to keep it open, they could vote an override or whatever they want to do to keep their school open, and that is entirely up to them. But I just don't think that, and I understand the whole historical thing of I'm not insensitive to the fact that school's been around there and parents' parents have gone there, but times are different now, and I don't want to be able to tell the chiefs that, well, you can't have a needed firefighter or a policeman or Bob a needed plow driver because we've got to keep a school open that benefits no one in the town of Templeton.
Mhm.
So that's why we've asked for that ad hoc committee.
Yeah, and, I'll in this forum, I'll apologize that, if we miscommunicated and we didn't react to your request, however and whenever we got it. I'm apologizing that we did not react to
I'm
your
not looking for apology,
request.
I'm just looking for you to form a committee.
Well, so, I believe that we've done that, and, I know Carter had tried to facilitate the December 4th meeting as a day where we could,
Oh, okay.
start with the ad
I'll
hoc
have to
committee.
look at his, all right. I'll
Okay.
have to-
I haven't heard that.
I hadn't heard that.
Well, he's trying to facilitate the dates, so if you look in your email,
I saw a date for
December 5th,
Yeah.
for the joint.
if you have
joint
anything to say.
meeting. I haven't seen anything for the,
While
I
we're
saw
still
something
talking
with the
about the ad hoc, if you'd like to
26th.
say anything on it, I know you,
For the ad hoc, yeah.
okay, communication.
Cheeseburgers, penalty.
So I apologize preemptively.
Regarding the cuts that we have to make to cover this, we're really not as bad as some people may think, because there is the reserve fund there. There is the unassigned fund balance, commonly called free cash. And there is some money in other places of the budget. They were so small, though, you do like 50 cuts to get, 20, 30 grand. But there's money there, and it was really a timing thing, because, and I'll ask Luann in a second, I got an email today from the DOR that there's 97 tax rates set out of 351. I don't know how, up to date, but that's supposedly with their new website and system, supposed to be like almost real time. So a lot of this was getting this done was a timing thing. So, because the 1/12 budget was greater than what we ended up with, so we were paying a little more upfront, now we're gonna pay a little bit less. But the DOR won't take, you were here, and then your expenses you took a little bit away, but your school come in, you gotta balance it back out, and they won't take an IOU or, got the money on the back end, they won't do that. So we have to fix this, so we can show them on paper, we can pay this bill. We have to set the tax rate, and this is where I'd ask Luann where we are with that process. As soon as we do this, on Tuesday, and the tax rate classification, then you go and plug that stuff in for the tax recap sheet, is that like, and I know they say I think in that email they're also like a little behind, or they're just swamped.
Yeah, right now, the DOR is stopping any certification of free cash for any other towns right now, and they're told to go full speed on setting town tax rate. And you are correct,
Wow.
there's less than 100 towns out of 351 city and towns in the state that do have a tax rate set, and everybody's tax rate should be set before the end of December. In a perfect world, the middle of December, so that way everybody can get the bills out. So, we're having our classification hearing with you guys on Tuesday night.
Mm-hmm.
Then we'll go in and sign the LA5, which is the certification of either a split or a single tax rate across the board for the town, once you decide and vote on that. And then once that's submitted, I've talked with Kelly, we're pretty much ready to submit the tax rate recap too. So hopefully I'm anticipating probably the week after Thanksgiving, getting that into the state, probably Tuesday or Wednesday, and depending on how fast, or if anything
Wow.
kicks back and they're questioning. You know, we're hoping, normally I get a good 4 to 5 day turnaround, but again, the state's really backed up, so that could be a week or two turnaround for the new rate, so.
And that's the other thing about getting, the timing of getting all of this done, because if the bills don't go out by December 31st, then it gets pushed way down, and that's the lady, the board that generates the money, the bills to bring money in to operate everything, including getting the roads plowed, you know, fire and ambulance, police call, whatever, and there was one, I understand, this morning. So that all gets affected, it'll just snowball down the road. And if we need money, then the alternative is to borrow it, and that increase the cost, maybe not, you know, millions of dollars, but it increase the cost to operate the town, to borrow,
Yeah.
tax anticipation notes, and it would just all snowball. But once, if we get this done and the tax rate gets set and the bills go out, then it'll be like, and at the end of the year, for snow and ice, or the insurance and benefits and stuff, we have the money, we can just fix it then. But, you know, the DOR won't, you gotta have it fixed up front, just to get all of this done. So, and at the same time, we will be doing the 21 budget and starting all the fun all over again. The biggest bill, one of the biggest bills is individual, is the school assessment. So it's, a lot of it was timing, and we're not really as bad as it looks, but we're not in great position, but hopefully everything will fall into place and stuff will go out, and then January 1st, wake up and everything will be rolling smooth again, but, and then, you know, a lot of people came up with plans better than the last time we had to do the 1/12 budget. We had a plan up front. There, the pieces kind of fell a little different, but like police officers, they came in, that wasn't the chief, that was the officers that come in and said, hey, we'll give up some of our things in our labor contract to help out. And all of that stuff really, really helped out, so people should know that and realize that. So,
You're absolutely right, and I gotta give credit to all the department heads, because they certainly went out of their way to make sure that they kept the spending to a minimum as much as they could moving forward, and I, like you, to your point, the timing helped us, because we were able to gauge and go through the accounts in order to figure out everything, and with the insurance, for example, finding out where it got set at, and all these other accounts, so it worked to our advantage.
yeah, we're like almost halfway going into the third quarter, and you
Right.
look at like the police, the fire, and the highway, and I think it's like 30% spent, 32, 24, so it's really been good that they've kept it that tight. Of course, you know, it's not the perfect way to do things, but you gotta do what you gotta do sometime, and that's a good job. That's a lot of effort to, under a third when you're almost halfway there, and, so, but hopefully it'll all work out, be good.
Mr. Chairman, if I might, first off, I'd like to apologize for being late, and if I'm being redundant also, I'm sorry for that. But I agree, I think it was a very good job on the part of the chiefs, pulling back on the services at the beginning of the year, you know, to avoid a big hit in the middle of the year. My question, looking at these cuts, revolves around that. I mean, you know, the police chief did a nice job, the fire chief did a nice job. If you look at the BBAs, it shows that they've been running under their proposed budget and so forth. And I'm just kind of curious, you know, looking at those numbers, the savings that were produced by their actions seem to be more than the cuts that we're making here. So I was just, you know, looking at it that, you know, they did this, we didn't have the officers, we're not going to be spending that money in the second half of the year, it would kinda seem like a good thing to do is use that money rather than cut other services.
They'll be operating under their budgets that were approved. The public safety departments.
Right, and that.
No, what I understood is that money that they saved, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I asked this question, I think, before we
Okay.
got here. They took that into account, so we had a bigger gap than 71,332, or 71,322. And the money that the department saved, let's just say it was $50,000, lowered that number down to 71,322. What they didn't spend lowered what we had, the remaining gap we had to cut.
Okay, so all the savings, let's say the $43,000 in the police, the $30,000 in fire and treasury and so forth, is all accounted for prior to that 71,000?
So basically, like the savings, like you see insurance and benefits, so like the, let's say the highway department, for example, didn't have a benefit position for a portion of the year. So we looked at that, so now the town administrator has been in talks with the department heads to make sure that they're planning to fill certain positions. But we have to be cognizant of the fact that we're going into fiscal year '21. Do we wanna really go out and hire, let's say, a police officer, send them to the police academy, and then lay them off come July, so.
That is part of the discussion, right?
Correct.
But it's always been a sliding scale of time. If we had been successful in getting a budget like a month after, like, August 1st, the cuts would have been very minimal. But as time marched on, they ballooned. They were going to actually go out of control to the point where we were gonna have 4, 5, 6, upwards of 6.
This is, I'm definitely, I misspoke or something, because you guys are answering questions that I'm not asking.
Oh, sorry.
All I'm, basically looking for, it looks to me, from looking at the most recent BVA, that we have additional monies in the departments because of their actions. It looks like there is additional money in those accounts right now.
That's if they expended on a, like a chronological, like if their expenditures were the same every
I
month.
do
and I don't-
understand
yeah.
that, Mike, but I'm just, I'm
Yeah.
just looking at it as it is now and knowing
Yeah.
that they
I mean,
have.
it's information,
Let me
so,
give you an example. Say, Chief Bennett, I'm not picking on you, but say he had the officer that he wanted, okay? And that officer made $5,000 a month, and we've gone 5 months. What happened to that $25,000 that he didn't expend? That's what he's asking.
Yeah,
I'm
Is
saying,
it
and
still-
we
is it
won't be
still in their
expending that
account?
either,
right,
no matter if we hire the officer today.
right.
Right.
So I think that is a savings, and the town took a hit, the offices took a hit. I think we need to respect that and use that hit rather than cutting others.
Right.
That's just my
Yeah.
thought, and it looks like the money's already there, so it looks like a no-brainer, and it satisfies the need for DOR to have a specific cut also.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like to me, and I might be wrong, I don't know, it doesn't look like to me that would hurt the police chief's budget.
The
If
logic
from-
of it
from
works,
where-
I mean,
right,
yeah.
in
That's-
logical terms.
That's what I tried to ask earlier.
I'm
because
not,
maybe
you
didn't
know,
understand it.
I'm looking forward to us having a full police department and us having a full force in the fire department, but I don't think this inhibits that.
Hmm.
Right.
That was my only question. It looks like free money.
Right.
So why are we cutting?
And I asked that earlier, and maybe wrongly, you led me to believe that you essentially used that money to get to the 71,322 number. That the gap was bigger,
Mhm.
you used the money that wasn't spent by the departments, the preemptive money, to get down to that number, and that's what you had to make. So if that's not the case, then maybe I misunderstood, or I didn't ask my question right. But it's the same, I had the same
Yeah.
question.
Does that logic
What's
make
gonna
sense
happen is gonna
to
end up in free
the both
cash.
chiefs sitting in the room?
That year, exactly.
Does that make sense, or, I mean, is it a question that,
Well, I can tell you from my standpoint that the savings that we were trying to make, some of them were for tuition, but others, like I explained in the beginning of this process, when the cuts that we were gonna absorb in the fire department, I became the second responder during the day, but in my budget.
Yeah, I heard you on the
My
scanner this
budget
morning.
presentation, in preparation for this year's budget.
Yep.
My position is mainly an administrative position, with helping the guys in the field. When I became the second person, my vacation time, my holiday time, my personal time was not in the budget, but all of a sudden had to be filled when I was gone, or I did not have a clue. So, all of my savings wasn't there. Anytime I had to miss, had to go in. We've seen an upper increase of calls, in town, both on the fire and ambulance side and inspection sides, this year. Our numbers are up. So, I can't say tonight if my call force budget is, it's doing well. The guys have been doing well and not overloading it and everybody coming in, so forth. But I mean, calls
Yeah,
are
but
up.
he's not talking about like additional, he's talking about the money savings that we've earned to this point. Wouldn't
That's all I
that
was
cover-
referring to. It
Yep.
looks like there
So-
is savings.
why wouldn't
so-
we
We'll,
put
we'll take that
services
question
back?
back. We'll
But why
take the
would-
question back.
But why wouldn't we put the services back? Like, I know some firemen had their hours reduced.
Well, part of the problem
And
is
they're,
if,
you
because
know,
the
they're
funds
in
that the
danger of
money's in,
losing their homes.
you can't transfer.
Look at,
that money.
we're doing what we can to get the departments back to where they are,
Right.
and that
Should be a
money
first
that was
priority.
budgeted will be used. This
Um,
is the difference.
But I don't think it will, not all of it.
It-
No, because there's
it-
certain,
If I can speak, it doesn't matter if it's spent. If it's not spent by the end of the year, it goes to free cash.
right,
That's.
Okay,
Yes.
I am already witnessing, I lost 2 officers from this cut.
Yep.
Yep.
2 of my lowest paid officers. To fill those positions, I hired 2 individuals that are trained that I have to pay more than the 2 that I lost. So that already blows my budget out of whack.
okay.
So yes, if there's
That's a good
some
point.
money there, it's not gonna be much by the end of the year.
So,
I do have a plan with Mr. Terrazini to restore services effective January 1st. I can't do it tomorrow, because we don't operate like that. I can't just bring somebody on board and put them on the road the next day. It doesn't happen like that. As much as I fight with town halls sometimes when they don't get my stuff done on a timely manner, I sit there and I tell them, listen, we operate totally different than anybody else in this room. We operate 24/7, 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. For me to not have a guy or have a position filled is thousands of dollars a week. Just to train these 2 guys is gonna be $6,800 in overtime. So, yes, there's some money there, but Mr. Mayor, there won't be that much at the end of the year.
Okay, no, that's exactly.
that's a great
That answers my
example.
question
Along with
perfectly.
The police chief,
Appreciate it.
I lost a trained firefighter because of the budget cuts. The person I brought in to fill that spot is not trained. There is $16,000 in overtime that I have to find to send this person to the academy.
So Chief, what you're saying is essentially is if you've saved 20,000 in salary, whoever you hire might require more salary than the people you lost, therefore it's gonna eat into that.
Absolutely,
Okay.
that's what has
Oh,
already.
that's fine,
happened,
that's,
yes.
okay.
And I didn't want to misspeak for the police chief or the fire chief, so I was.
No, that's fine. Okay. I think maybe when I asked my question originally, maybe I probably just didn't ask it properly. And then Bob, as eloquent as usual, took care of that for me.
Okay.
But we got the
Yeah.
answer, that's
Thank
the
you.
good part.
Yeah.
I'll pay you later.
That was a compliment.
So if you follow, like just Chief Bennett's, if you follow his lead and his storyline or his outline, if we didn't do the cuts, and if we could make that happen with the DOR, if we didn't make the cuts, it would, and we use that money to cover the school thing, the shortage would actually be worse.
Mm-hmm.
Because he wouldn't be able to hire the part-time guys, you know,
Yep.
that you have on force already, and then he's 2 more, they're not full-time, but he's getting some coverage.
Yeah.
And if we use that money, that it is there, that, you know, that we're gonna pay, it'll save because we're not on that 1/12 higher number now. But if we use that to cover the 71, it would actually be worse on the service end for the residents, because he wouldn't be able to do those things. He wouldn't be able to bring in, you know, on-call fire, ambulance, he wouldn't be able to shuffle stuff around. So, and again, I want people to understand that that money that we were spending on the 1/12 higher 1/12 is not being spent now, and it's there. By it being there, they're actually able to, you know, move the pieces around, to provide a little more service than otherwise wouldn't be there if we used it in place of the cuts. So, as bad as the cuts is, it's actually a small benefit to everybody. And it's welcome to government spending, but that's the game that, and the rules that we got to do. But it's actually allowing us to do a little bit more with that money that we were spending and now we're not spending. So, like I said, it's, once we get the tax rate and the bill, and then things will hopefully just work out a little bit better. And as we go, see how 21 goes. And, I mean, the State House is still screwing around with that supplemental for
the school.
2019. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff that can still happen. So we're not as bad as it seems, because we are getting a little bit here, a little bit there with those funds. And we should think about that.
And kind of to bring it full circle, how are we gonna meet about the ad hoc committee for Phillipston? How do we set that meeting?
The two chairs are working,
Yeah,
so
they're gonna work on it.
yeah, we got it in the works.
Okay.
Anything else?
Any other, any department heads have any input on any of the cuts or the process? Any observations?
Hope we don't have to do it next year.
Yeah,
Oh.
amen to that, chief.
Yeah.
That's why I'm pushing the whole school, because I don't think that you chiefs need to go through that again.
We really did.
And Bob too, Bob, when I say the chiefs, I mean you too, Bob. I don't mean to exclude you.
We just really did pull it back. I mean, even in development services, we went without, you know, a couple months with no admins, which helped in a way.
Yeah, that tore you apart. You worked your butt off to make that happen.
Slightly.
I think that was her, yeah.
But,
That was
I
her
mean,
meaning.
everybody came together,
Right,
you know, the departments really helped each other, so.
yeah, and that goes a long way. I mean,
Yes.
when people watch, I think that people need to know that we, operations in a fiscally constrained environment really does impact people as well.
Does
Do
anybody,
more with less.
does anybody have any answers how it won't happen again? Because when Mr. Hatch spoke, he said it was gonna take about 7 years for Narragansett to get the funding from the state that it needed to operate. I mean, so if this is year one, how do we address it? I mean, we're hopeful that it doesn't happen again next year, but where he said it's gonna take 7 years to get the funding, what are we, does anyone have any answers about that?
Well,
Because I don't wanna lead people to have a false hope that it couldn't happen again if it's gonna take 7 years from the state to
So
meet us.
there are a few things to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, right now, we're putting together the 5-year projections in accordance with the financial management policy. I mean, in my memo I laid out to the board, I was waiting for that school department to have the final number. I will be preparing a memo to the select board, and I will also send out to advisory committee on the school escalators, because we have to really look at that in order for me to come together with a accurate 5-year projection, according to our policy. And there's also another thing that we need to update certain things within that policy. So I will be providing a memo to the select board soon.
Thanks, Adam. Have you heard back from Honorable Charlie Baker? When you sent the letter?
The governor has not called me
Governor,
yet.
whatever. Sorry, my apologies.
No.
I don't know this podcast.
And there's a couple other, so there's that, there is,
Noel's
the
still
the
gonna-
chairs, yep. There's Mr. Francis's initiative, all of the boards, the board chairs, with their administrators, have pledged to the first Tuesday of every month to have a meeting. They'll be hosted here, the school district, most likely in Phillipston, to have the meetings to basically talk about the budget. What can we do? What efficiencies can we find within our staffs to reduce the, really, it's to talk about the school budget and how, and not, not so much, putting the laser pointer on them saying that you have to do that, but
Right.
what efficiencies can we find to reduce the burden of, budget demands on both
Wouldn't you
communities?
say to balance it, to balance
Sure.
both sides? So
But
that-
that's, yeah, I stress the word efficiencies because that's the tool, I've said it before, that we didn't have enough in our toolbox going forward. We accepted a budget, they came, we all nodded at them, we said thank you for it, but that was we didn't do anything afterwards. We pledged to support the override failed, and then it was crickets. We weren't working together to be able to say, well, what now? What are we going to do? A lot of our ideas came late, so now we're saying this year, lockstep with the budget process that we already have, countdown to town meeting is what we call it, that sheet that we have, to basically have these supplemental meetings. I'm sure the ad hoc meeting will actually lend to that process as well. So that's another thing that we have to do that. Although unfortunate, I think that we also have the experience from going through this year. The school committee definitely, I think, is gonna have some retrospectives on how they acted, or what was their decision-making process? Was it hand in hand with what we did within the town? If we made propositional cuts, I think we beat them by at least a month or two to say, this is what we're doing to prepare for this. And they ultimately, at the end, chose to accept the 19.5 that the town gave indication of 3 or 4 times to say that they wanted that, and they did that. I think that they're now going to be a little bit wiser during this next budget process to say, we don't want to go through that again, like Chief Dickey said.
And to my knowledge, the state only said we had to pay 19.2,
State didn't say
and that was the
anything
risk
officially.
that they were taking.
Where were you pulling that? I don't, yeah.
Right? That was the risk. When we sent that letter out, the last letter out, the original number, if I'm not mistaken, because they took the state took the numbers from 20, a lower number, 19.2, right? From the, and I think you asked.
I'd be glad to give the school if they say
We
that,
gave them more
if they
than
wanted
what
20
the
million and I
state-
had 20 million, I'd give them
Right.
20 million.
Right, but we
With
still rose to
19.5,
the
we still have to go through
occasion.
this process,
At
and everyone's
nine-
had to work long
At
hours. but-
19.5, we still rose to the occasion and gave them more than what we had to.
The state,
is
the
what I'm
state
trying to
never
say.
gave us an official number, so
I thought
Yeah.
they did.
then it's just conjecture.
I thought
But
it
I
was
would like
19.
first to fully fund the departments that we have, so we're 100% manned in all our departments,
In 2020.
providing the service expectations that the town has in every department. I want the senior services to have as much flexibility as they can get. I read that the Meals on Wheels truck, the frame's cracked. These are the things that we have to be able to react to make sure that we can provide that. Even if it's a low-density number of citizens in town that get that service, they need that. We need to be able to say, as a community, that we can do that. So if the school needs the money, I want to be there for them, but I also want to be solvent within the town as well. And I think we've got a couple, as we're going forward in this process now, I think we have some pretty good starting points to go with it. A couple of things that we did not do within the last budget process.
Anybody have anything else?
As an informational meeting, this is just basically, that's what was proposed. We did get, as I pointed out, it wasn't just, darts on a wall. Like, we got to those numbers based on a lot of data and hard work. But again, it's an informational meeting to kind of discuss through it. Because, again, we don't want to just say, yep, that's done, and they're all done. We want to make sure we're talking with the community, especially the people that volunteer their time in the community.
So
to deal with these things.
next meeting's the 5th, if I understand right?
All boards.
All boards meeting on the 5th,
Yep.
and that's at the senior center?
We're hoping to have a
That's
meeting
the
with
same
the
date
ad
as
hoc
our-
on the 4th.
That's the same as our,
That's Thursday, okay, yeah, perfect, I'll be here. Or there.
send me an email. How many, do you have an idea how many people you want for the ad hoc? Or
I think,
think about it, everybody please
two,
think if you'd like to be a member of that.
two or three. I mean, when we had discussed ad hocs before, when I was sitting on that side of the table, we talked about 2 and 2. As a, probably that would be a good minimum.
So if anybody is interested in that, please let me know.
But
I'll
December
I'll send
4th
an email out.
Yeah, December 4th is what Carter had sent to you an email.
Okay.
Just, I don't want
I-
to further
you sent it today, I
obfuscate
haven't seen it.
our communication. Okay?
Okay.
Anything else? I'll get to my appointment on time. Thank
There
you.
you go.
Well, I think that's all we have. Thank you to Adam
Take
for presenting
Yeah,
tonight.
Adam.
Thank you to all the staff and department heads that came tonight. Appreciate that. Tony,
no, I'm good. Nobody else has?
No.
I'll accept
Thanks,
the
Mike.
motion to adjourn.
Take a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Good.
Well,
Yep.
adjourn.
Work concluded.